When my anxiety symptoms were at their worst, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Once I ended up in the ER because my oxygen was getting too low, and another time, Ryan and I were on a weekend getaway, and I ended up on the floor of our room, unable to go out to dinner because I couldn't catch my breath. I will never take the ability to take a nice, deep breath for granted again. But those experiences really got me interested in breathwork, which I think of as a practice that involves intentionally changing your breathing pattern to improve your overall well-being. In this episode, Campbell Will, a breathwork practitioner, is going to help us understand the difference this could make in our lives. We don't typically think about breathing much because our body just automatically breathes. So this is your chance to slow down for a few minutes and really grasp the benefits that intentional breathwork could have for you. A powerful episode with powerful insights and a gift at the end. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Daily Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Meredith. I've led my family on a transformative health journey for over a decade, and now I help other families do the same. So this is a place where you can learn about healthy living and take the next step in your wellness journey. Campbell, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
I'm excited, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a selfish endeavor, I feel like sometimes, because I just love to nerd out on all this kind of stuff. And I feel like I always learn so much, and I'm excited to learn from you today. You are a breathwork educator. Can you tell us how you even got interested in this in the first place?
Yeah, it really came from, this kind of collision of two worlds, honestly. My background as a physiotherapist, I was working in intensive care as a respiratory physiotherapist. So my whole focus was really breathing and getting people moving. And then at the same time, I'd kind of stumbled across this guy called Wim Hof, who was like climbing mountains in the snow and doing all this kind of crazy stuff. And it, number one, piqued my interest. And number two, it kind of gave me this idea as to like, well, I'm working with this in a more clinical setting, but there's incredible potential of what people are doing outside of that. How can I melt two worlds? So that kind of set me on a journey that I'm still on today, honestly. But I kind of went over to the Netherlands and studied with Wim, and since then kind of went around the world and really just studied with different experts in their field, right? Whether it's neuroscience, whether it's free diving, whether it's the yogis and pranayama, and just really trying to like take what are the principles that apply today that also fit with this model of understanding health, right? As a clinical physiotherapist, I really wanted to make sure that like, how does this work in terms of the nervous system and people's biomechanics and how they move? And so that's really just been this journey of like, how do we bring those two worlds together? The potential for this kind of like conscious breathing space, but also bringing the assessment and treatment of breathing into breathwork, because that's something I found was really missing, that you can do the right thing the wrong way and you're not going to get the results that you're after, right? If you're breathing poorly 25,000 times a day, we can't kind of override that by doing a 20-minute breathwork session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating journey, first of all. That would be amazing to have all those experiences and learn from all those different areas. I think that was really wise of you. It sounds like just a really well-rounded way to approach that. So I appreciate that. Like, that makes me want to learn from you even more. And so I'm guessing that you came out of that with something that really lit a fire in you to be like, okay, now that I have this knowledge, I've got to find a way to share that with people. And you kind of hinted at it because you said, something is missing here. So what was it that really motivated you to then take that and start sharing it with the world?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. And it's so funny how often I now hear the term missing piece from other health practitioners, right? Like, I think there's a missing piece. I think this might be the missing piece. And I felt the exact same way. And for me, that missing piece wasn't breathwork, it was breathing, right? And I think there's a big difference between the two, right? Like, breathwork is so popular today and everyone's jumping on and like breathwork, but far fewer people are actually looking at breathing. This thing that we do from the moment we're born until the moment we die that can literally drive us towards disease and dysfunction, or can drive us towards health. And we take it for granted, honestly. And I did too, right? Like, I hadn't really considered the role that breath plays and all of these different facets of my own health, but also the health of my clients, until I had this one kind of moment. And this is the thing that kind of lit the fire. I was working with a client in ICU and just watching the sheer effort of this guy getting out of bed and taking like 2 or 3 steps and then sitting down in a chair. And by the time he caught his breath, he looked at me and just said, when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. And I was like, huh, like it just was one of those perfect moments at a time that I was already like looking at breath. And then here was this little message of like, wait a minute, there's something to this. And I just started thinking of all the clinical settings I work. Like we wait until it's too late. We're waiting until someone's really sick. Someone's like really just getting by. And now we're trying to like pick up the pieces. And so I then started to look, I worked with sporting teams and athletes and general public. I'm like, maybe we should be teaching breathing now, because I thought back, I'm like, I didn't get taught breathing in school. I didn't get taught about breathing at physiotherapy school, right? We had one lecture on the diaphragm and it was on neurological injuries. It's like, oh, if someone, this nerve gets severed and their diaphragm doesn't work, here's what we do.
That's interesting.
99.9% of people, that's not relevant, right? But they're still breathing and no one's teaching them about how their breath works. And so that was this like, the fire that started just burning and burning and burning. It was like, it's almost like this, instruction manual for the body that I think the better we understand our own body, the better we can use it. And the analogy I often use here is like, if you didn't know how, it's like we have this iPhone in our hand, this incredible piece of technology. The more you understand how it works, the more you can get out of it, right? If you didn't know that it connected to the internet, it's not that useful, right? And so the deeper we have this understanding of how this thing works, how this technology works, the more we can use it. And I look at our breathing just like a technology, right? It's like the more I understand how it can increase my energy or decrease my anxiety or help me with sleep or improve my digestion, the more I can use it. And so that's where I really started moving into the kind of education side of things. Like, yes, I still work with clients one-to-one, but I'm much more passionate about like just educating people of like, hey, we all have this tool available to us, and the more that you understand how it works, the greater you can use it, the greater you're going to see these outcomes.
That makes me really curious. So let's just, since you mentioned some of those benefits already, let's just go through some of those again, if you don't mind. And like, for example, like how does breathing help my digestion? That's kind of mind blowing. So talk through some of those things.
So when we look, it almost always comes back to the autonomic nervous system, right? And so the autonomic nervous system, I like to describe as kind of like the conductor of the orchestra. So it's deciding, are we spending energy over here? Are we starting this process? Are we stopping that one? And that's all kind of run in the background. Like I don't consciously decide, oh, it's time for me to send some blood flow to my gut and digest my
right.
My nervous system decides that. And what informs my nervous system greater than anything else is my breath. And then let's give the kind of evolutionary example here. Back a long time ago, before I could kind of consciously play and change with my breath, it usually only ever changed in relationship to what was happening in the environment, right? The tiger steps out of the bush and, like this fast, rapid breathing for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years has signified something stressful is happening out there, right? That's very different to how you breathe when you're asleep or when you're relaxed with your family, And so my brain responds very predictably to certain changes in my breath. And so if we bring that back to something like digestion, right? When I can kind of inform my nervous system that we are in this rest and digest state, right? I'm breathing slow, I'm breathing steady, rhythmical. That's going to start to shift from this sympathetic state, which is my like action and survival and doing stuff, into this more parasympathetic state. Automatically, what happens there is blood flow comes back to my gut. I start to produce digestive enzymes. I start to produce saliva, right? And so my body's preparing for food. And it's doing that because my nervous system has said, it's time to eat, right? And so I can kind of use my breath to steer in and out of those states, right? I need to go and do this stressful presentation at work. I can breathe my way up into that state of increased attention and focus and energy, right? And once that's done, I can bring myself back down. It's like, whew, that's over. How do I know it's over? How does my nervous system know it's over? Well, I can kind of inform it. And so the way I always like to position this to people is like, it's learning to manually override the system. Because unfortunately today, we live in a world that's pretty stressful. People wake up and they're on their phone and social media and it's to-do lists and I drop the kids off and there's traffic and the food, it's like, we're really kind of pushing us in this direction of stress, right? For lack of a better term. And the other way to describe that is a sympathetic state. And so by me having the kind of steering wheel and I can drive my system back towards parasympathetic, that's where it starts to impact things like digestion and sleep and relaxation and pain, anxiety. It almost all comes back to the state that the nervous system is in. And that often comes back to how I'm breathing.
Yeah. Is that what you find most of your clients needing really immediate help with, at least, is getting into that parasympathetic state just because of how our society and culture is and everything, and just living in that stressed like kind of environment? Or do most people that you work with need from, I'm guessing the immediate need is like, help me to figure out this stress and this anxiety and all those things?
Exactly right, honestly. And it's funny because when I first started to learn about breathwork and I went and learned the Wim Hof method, that's very much like an upregulating practice. And I'd find more and more people like, that's not what they're after. They're like, teach me how to down-regulate. I need to help sleep. I need to reduce my anxiety.
Right.
Less. And it was a really interesting lesson I had, right? I'm from a small town in Australia called Cairns, which is like kind of like island vibe. It's tropical. It's very slow. And then I moved to New York City, right? And in Cairns, like people did well with the upregulation, right? It kind of like pumps everyone up. New York, I found it like as soon as I started teaching like down-regulating breath work, people were like falling asleep and they'd be like, oh, I have so, like, how did you do that? What happened? Like, I just switched off, you know? And it was a really important lesson for me, is to like, this state that people are in, we need to take into account when we choose what breath work do they need, right? Mm-hmm. Someone comes to me that's anxious and stressed, I don't want to give them stressful breath work. You know, like that sounds logical, but that's what most people are doing. It's like, you know, get a bunch of people in the room and make them breathe hard and fast for 30 or 45 minutes. And yeah, some of them might have this like great experience, but most of those people, you've just made them feel more stressed, right? Because you're breathing a stressful way. And so that was a huge kind of light bulb for me, as to like, you know, the person on the other side of this practice matters. What they need matters, right?
Right.
And some people do need a pick-me-up, right? But most people need to learn how to calm down, right? And to de-stress because of the environment that we live in today.
True. Yeah. That'd be such a funny change.
It really was. And it was like such a jolt for my nervous system.
Yeah.
Right. I just caught myself being a little bit anxious and roughing everywhere. And it's like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, it's just this like energy of this city, right? It's just nonstop, go, go, go. It's so busy. And my nervous system was responding to that. And I think, you know, we didn't last long in New York. And maybe that was, you know, we jokingly that New York kind of like spat us out.
Yeah.
It's such a, you know, like that's just the energy. That's the pace of things there. And I think people kind of get used to that state of their nervous system. I don't just mean New York City, right? But if you've been going through like a period of stress for a while, that becomes your new normal. And not just like what you're used to, but how your nervous system interprets the environment in which you're living. And so it's like, okay, everything's stressful now.
That's not always healthy, right?
And not always healthy, right? Because coming back to that idea of like, what state is my nervous system in? The longer I'm in that state of like sympathetic stress, responding to, you know, the less I'm allocating resources to like repair my cells and manage my inflammation and digest my food. And like the really critical aspects of health and longevity only occur when the nervous system feels safe, right? And it's like this kind of hierarchy. It's like if you're being chased by the tiger now, managing the inflammation so you're feeling healthy tomorrow doesn't matter, right? It's like, I just got to survive the tiger, because if I don't, it doesn't matter. And so the nervous system like allocates all its resources to the sympathetic nervous system and be like, let's get through this stress now, and then we can prioritize recovery. But if we never get out of that stressful state, we never prioritize recovery. And I think it's part of the reason we see these pretty crazy, right, chronic disease epidemics, the health outcomes that are like deteriorating worldwide, is I don't think people are recovering. Like they just don't know how to get back into that state where their body is like, no tigers, let me start to fix some stuff up.
Yeah, I'm safe. I can heal. Like
Exactly.
Yeah. So would you just say that breath work then is just the techniques and the skills that you give people like to help them in whatever way they need help with their breath?
It's such a good question. So whenever someone asks me like, what is breath work?
Yeah.
I always just kind of frame it as like, it's just the intentional use of your breath, right? For a desired outcome. So if I'm laying in bed awake at night and I want to go to sleep, how can I kind of, you know, make it easier to fall asleep? That's breath work, right? If I start to extend my exhales and slow my breath down, like I would argue that's breath work. If I wake up in the morning and I didn't sleep so well and I've got a meeting to go to and I need to kind of like pick myself up, can I breathe in a way that stimulates that part of my nervous system and makes me more alert? That's breath work. Right? It might not have a name of the Wim Hof method or transformational breathwork or these methods that are out there. But to me, breathwork is like, I understand how to use my breath for a desired outcome.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it's like helpful for people to like have a variety of these skills? Like, you said most people need help like deregulating, but at times it would also be good just to have knowledge of, how to pick myself up, right?
Absolutely. It's kind of, and there's the two ends of the spectrum, right? Like I'm awake, alert, stressed, anxious, and I need to come down, or I'm down and I need to come up, right? I want to go and exercise. I'm going to go meet my friends, but I'm feeling a bit sluggish today. The post-lunch lull, but I've still got to work this afternoon, It's really valuable to have these tools that I can use to kind of like change my state. And we know these things exist, right? The two biggest substances we use is caffeine and alcohol.
It's true.
In terms of like in the morning, what do most people want to feel? They want to feel alert, right? Drink a cup of coffee. What does it do? It stimulates, right? It's like, now I'm ready to take on the day. I had a crazy day, traffic was bad. I got home. I just need to have a glass of wine to wind down, right? What does alcohol do? It's a depressant, right? So it's like bringing us down. So we are seeking this like upregulation and downregulation as it is. Breathwork's just like an alternative, right? It's like, here's another option that can give you the same pep in your step in the morning and to bring you down or wind you down at the end of the day. Just happens to be far better for you than any external substance, right? I drink coffee, I drink wine. I'm not knocking those things completely, but it's nice to have options.
Yeah.
Because if you wake up in the morning and you're out of coffee and you're like, oh, like, what do you do? And if you just also had this ability to rely on this internal tool, it's like, oh, no problem, right? I can pick myself up another way.
Yeah, so much healthier, really. I mean, you don't have, both of those things have bad side effects and both of them can be addictive. And like, I think this is such a better way to approach it, like for the majority of your time, right?
Exactly. And to me, it also comes back to like intentional, right? Is like when I have a coffee now, like it's a practice, right? It's like I like to grind my beans and I smell the coffee and I love coffee, but it's less of like I need to get up and like turn the coffee machine on. It's like I need it to get going, and I've been through that period, right? Now it's like I'm going to get my energy levels up a different way, get some sunshine, drink some water, do some movement, do some breath work, and then I just get to enjoy the coffee because I love the taste, right? Rather than it's like this crush that I have, And I think that's that difference of intentionality of like, I'm choosing to use this for a certain reason. It's different to need it every day.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of that. One thing I wondered when I was thinking about talking with you, I've heard dentists say that, they can't help but like notice people's teeth, and chiropractors say that they, will notice people's posture. And I have nurses say that when I walk into the room, they always notice my veins because I have great veins for giving an IV and stuff like that. So do you notice that in people? Do you kind of like watch people and be like, this person really needs help with their breath?
Honestly, it's it's a blessing and a curse, but absolutely, like, I can't help but spy on people's breathing now. Like, if I'm sitting and the person in front of me in the line at the grocery store, or this person, it's like, once you know what to look for, it's hard not to see it, right? And what you tend to see is how many people breathe really poorly.
Yeah.
Right? And there is now research coming out to kind of give us the numbers of like how many people do have dysfunctional breathing. And the numbers are quite staggering. It's like a study came out of Brazil recently that like 65% of children are mouth breathing. Mouth breathing versus nasal breathing, it might seem, it's like, oh, what's the difference? This whole versus these ones. And it's crazy what it does to the brain, what it does to oral health, what it does for the diaphragm and posture, what it does for your physiology, right? Like how you're actually using oxygen and carbon dioxide, what it does to your nervous system. When we breathe through our mouth, it automatically puts us more into that sympathetic state. So if I'm doing that 24 hours a day, it's just burning out my nervous system, and so when we start to kind of like observe, and you're like, oh, everyone's breathing really poorly. It reminds me of like how important this stuff is just getting this information. It's like, oh, it does matter whether I breathe through my nose or my mouth.
Yeah.
It does matter if I'm breathing up into my shoulders versus using my diaphragm, because these things have an impact on how I feel. And part of my job, is helping someone understand that the symptoms that they have that they don't think are related to breathing are in fact related to breathing, right? No one comes to me saying, oh, I've got issues with my breathing. They come to me being like, I'm struggling with anxiety. I can't switch off at night. My energy's in the floor. My job is to help them understand like, yeah, but that may well be coming back to how your breathing is impacting your nervous system and your emotional state. And so the tricky thing, I think, with breathing and why so many people just disregard it, they're like, I don't have a problem with my breathing. because their breathing doesn't seem like it's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. But the symptoms they have coming up in different aspects of their life, right? Their stress, their energy, their mood, that ties back to breathing very, very clearly.
Yeah. What are you mentioned mouth breathing, you mentioned kind of breathing up in your shoulders. Like, what are some other things that you see that just to help us maybe recognize in ourselves, like that we might need to work on this?
Yeah. A few of the big problems that are really common, right, is the big gulping, gasping breath, right? I'm like talking, or I'm typing my email and I need to take these big sighs. What that big sigh usually signals is you've been holding your breath. And so a lot of people have this unconscious habit of holding their breath, particularly when they're a little bit stressed, they're a little bit overwhelmed. Maybe they're under cognitive demand. I'm really concentrating on something. I hold my breath. Or it could even be emotional, right? Like I'm worried about something, but we go into this kind of unconscious habit of holding the breath. And then my brain kind of says like, hey, we're not breathing. And then I take this big gulp of air in. And that kind of like stop, start is really quite chaotic for the nervous system, right? If we think of breathing quickly, kind of stimulates everything, breathing slowly slows everything down. If I'm not breathing and then I take this big gulp of air and then I'm not breathing, it's like my nervous system's like stop, start, where are we going?
I just imagine riding in a car and you're like...
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy. And so many people lack the awareness to notice I just started holding my breath. You know, and part of what I teach most of my clients, right? The first step is really building awareness. If you don't notice that you're breathing really quickly, there's not much you can do about it. You know, if you don't notice that you hold your breath every time you're worried, there's not much you can do about it. You know, you're only going to notice when you, or you start to feel dizzy, or you start to feel anxious, right? That's kind of like the downstream effect. And if we can build the awareness of what's happening prior to that, then I can do something about it.
Yeah. What is it about breathing that helps people so much with like panic attacks, anxiety, that type of stuff? I know that's something that you've talked a lot about in your social media. Like, what is it, the connection there where that really helps people that are struggling with those symptoms specifically?
Yeah. So one of the big links between breathing and anxiety or panic is physiology. You know, we so often, you know, you ask a lot of people to describe their anxiety, and they're describing physiology, right? My heart's beating really fast. My chest is really heavy. It feels like I can't breathe. My mind is racing, right? These things have a basis in a change of physiology. And so breathing reliably changes physiology, right? You hold your breath, there's a change in the chemistry of your blood. If you breathe rapidly, there's a change in the chemistry of your blood. And so when we start to understand what role does breathing play on what we call anxiety and panic, then me being able to change my breath is directly going to impact that experience. And so to give you an example, one that I often come up against is people say, I have social anxiety, right? Being in this social situation makes me feel anxious. And that's not entirely true, right? That social situation might be a trigger that causes you to change your breath, right? You just started breathing more rapidly, or you just started breathing up into your chest, or you just started holding your breath. You didn't notice that.
So interesting to think about it like that.
Right. And so what that person calls their anxiety is actually a response to this disruption of their physiology that they're creating, right? Like, that's not to say, again, it's not just like, well, it's just all internally generated. The cue or the trigger might be something in the external world, something someone said, a situation that you're in. But the actual cause of that feeling of anxiety is physiology. And so when I've got a little bit more control over my own physiology, then I can prevent myself getting to that point where I feel really dysregulated or really out of sorts.
Mm-hmm. I can share a little bit of a related story to this because probably 3 or 4 years ago now, I started having that tightness in my chest and shortness of breath, just that heaviness really. And I didn't know what it was. And there's so many things in your chest area. You know, you have your heart and your lungs are down here and then you're, yeah, I don't know. It's just like, you know, it was kind of trying to diagnose myself is what I'm trying to say. And I was like, I don't know what's going on with me, like, but I just can't breathe. And for one thing, that makes me like really relate to that patient that you mentioned that said, when you can't breathe, nothing else really matters. Cause I would have moments where I'm like, cannot I get a breath? Like, and it's not the worst feeling. Yeah. But even though I I didn't do anything formal or like extremely intentional. I am a singer, so I knew about breathing from my diaphragm, and I would catch myself breathing, trying to breathe way up here and not feeling like I could get a deep breath. But when I would switch and really be intentional about breathing with my diaphragm, then I could breathe so much better. And it felt like it just almost bypassed that tightness in my chest almost, and brought me a lot of relief. So just not even knowing something real formal about breath work, like I could tell that being intentional about my breath and slowing it down and being more present and getting it out of my that breath out of my chest, for me, like I could tell a big difference just in that little bit that I knew.
Yeah. And kind of like it, I always get so excited when people kind of like tap into this innate knowledge, right? No one told you that chest breathing versus diaphragm breathing, but when you kind of think about it, right, your lungs are shaped like a triangle or a pyramid, right? They're pointy at the top and they're wide at the bottom. So when we breathe up into the chest, we're breathing into the part of the lungs that's really narrow. There's not as much blood flow. There's not as much alveoli, which are the tiny little balloons that actually move the oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so, yeah, it feels like I'm not getting enough, right?
Yep.
The natural response to that is to breathe more. So people start taking more of these like shallow chest breaths, which increases their heart rate, right? So it's like this cycle. And so when you were able to bring the breath down low, the wide base of your lungs is where all of the blood flow comes in and moves the oxygen, the carbon dioxide. And so like you've intuitively found your way to like breathing down here makes me feel different than breathing up here. And that is one of the most common things we see is this breathing pattern that's kind of like up into the chest and the shoulders. And if you're doing that 20 to 25,000 times a day, and you also experience stress and anxiety, I would ask the question.
Yeah, right.
How much of what I call my stress and anxiety is my body just like crying out? We're like, hey, we're just not getting enough because you're breathing into the wrong part of your lungs. You're using the wrong muscles, right? Like we're designed to breathe down here. This is kind of like our emergency breath, right? Like sprint up a hill or run up a set of stairs and notice how you breathe.
Right.
Like I'm picking up because that's the fastest way to get air into the top of the lungs. But when it's not an emergency, the breath's meant to come right down to the base of the lungs, right? Fill outwards rather than climb upwards. And that causes a different response in the nervous system.
Yeah, totally makes sense. When you say it like that, I'm like, yeah, what does this make sense? Like these light bulbs. Yeah. And then just to give some practical examples, what have you seen as far as clients who were not sleeping well? Like what have been some outcomes that you have seen when they started to work on their breath work, and how does that get better for them?
Sleep is such an interesting one, because it's this performance enhancing drug in a way, right? You sleep well, everything seems a bit easier, and you're sleeping poorly and everything seems a little bit harder. We just gone through a stretch of about 2 months where our 2-year-old just has not slept through the night. And the last 2 nights he slept through twice in a row. And it's like, I just feel like a different person today.
Yeah.
And like the stress levels that I was experiencing were so much tied to the fact that I was waking up 2-3 times a night for an hour, and it's like, it felt like everything is so hard and like the job and it's like, it's just the fact that I'm not sleeping, right? Because today versus a week ago, nothing's different. I'm like, I'm not stressed. Like everything's a breeze. Whereas 2 weeks ago, I'm like, oh my God, this is so hard.
Sleep is so important. Yeah.
And so one of the big things I think people miss with sleep is, right, we get told it's like, oh, this nighttime routine, right? I'm going to wind down before bed. But I think good sleep really starts the start of the day, in terms of not just what we're doing with breathing, but making sure we're getting some sunlight, right? Moving our body. But I find this ability to kind of like regulate our nervous system throughout the day. And the way that I describe that is like finding the off switch a couple of times throughout the day is going to help you find the off switch when you lay down in bed at night. So many people, right, get to the end of the day and it's been maybe a busy day, right? And then maybe I watched some TV or I was on social media and then I jumped into bed and it's like, now I'm just expecting to go to sleep.
Yeah.
My system has been in the on state since I woke up, right? Because I haven't taken pause. I haven't down regulated. Like it's just been like go, go, go all day. And so again, it's like I get used to that state. And then we're expecting it's just like time to fall asleep. And we often are exhausted, right, physically, but my mind is really awake and alert. And so if throughout the day, let's say for 5 minutes, 2 or 3 times, you found the off switch, right? You paused, you closed your eyes, you slowed your breath down, and you helped your nervous system shift gears. Then when it's 9 or 10 or whatever time you go to bed and you lay down and you start to breathe slowly, it's like my nervous system's like, we've been here a couple of times. We know where the off switch is. And so I find people's sleep latency, like how long does it take them to get to sleep, becomes much, much less, right? Instead of laying in bed for an hour, waiting for sleep to come, it's like, it takes me 10 minutes because I know where the off switch is. And then the second thing that I often encounter is the people that wake up frequently. Instead of waking up, go to the bathroom, and then I'm up for 30, 40 minutes, it's like wake up, go to the bathroom, start to do that breathing exercise, and I'm back down, right? And so like, again, the how long am I up for becomes much shorter because we are manually overriding the system. It's like, let's go back to sleep nervous system, and here's how I can push you in that direction.
That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of benefits like sleep, like just the anxiety issue I know is huge for people. I mean, those two things alone, I'm guessing almost everyone listening can relate to.
Right. And, I see, like, I kind of talk about this as what I think like the big 4 problems are today. And it's stress, anxiety, pain, and energy, and a lot of those things aren't well managed by the healthcare system today.
That's so true.
We see stress-related dysfunction is everywhere, and the generic information people get given is, oh, you just need to like manage your stress or take a break. It's like, that's not really valid advice in terms of how our body responds to stress. Yeah. Anxiety, we've seen a huge increase in anxiety medication, but we haven't seen a reduction in anxiety, right? That should make us all ask the question of like, is the medication addressing the root cause? Because if we're increasing medication, we should see rates of anxiety going down. We don't, right? Chronic pain, again, is one of these really tricky things that just isn't well understood and isn't well managed by the traditional healthcare system. And then energy or fatigue, right? Like you speak to almost anyone today and it's like, do you feel that you're at 100% energy? People are like, no, and that probably ties back, number one, to sleep, but also just, we won't dive too far down the rabbit hole of physiology today, but how our body produces energy is very much dependent on chemistry, and so my breathing plays a huge role in whether or not I can actually get oxygen into the cells where it can get energy. And if I can't, then I'm just like, I'm using less of my engines, right? And they're not working as efficiently as they could.
Yeah, we got to get oxygen in, right? So our blood can circulate that through the body. And that's a great point too. All of this is, I don't know, I think some people can look at breath work and think this is kind of like this woo-woo thing. You know what I mean? But this is very like scientific thing.
Right. And there's a big difference. I agree. Like when I first, heard of breath work, I saw it as this woo-woo thing, and I still think there's aspects of it that are, and I'm not necessarily saying woo-woo is bad, right? There is some components of breath work that
I'm a woo-woo girl.
Yeah, that can't explain via objective science. Like it's incredible. And I've seen it do things, and I've watched people have these experiences that like, I'm not even going to attempt to explain through the lens of science, So I think we need to keep room for the magic, right? And the art. But outside of that end of the spectrum, there's this whole other side, which is this like functional, restorative side of breathing. And when we say the word breath work, most people think of, right, hyperventilating in a room and like crying, screaming and catharsis and trauma. But the other side is like the thing that you're doing 20,000 times a day, the thing that you maybe have been doing poorly because you had back pain or you sit at a desk or you had asthma as a kid or you're anxious, right? Or a huge one that I'm kind of really feel is just missing at the moment is pregnancy, right? Like the hormonal changes and the physical changes that a woman goes through from conception to delivery fundamentally change the way she breathes.
Yeah.
Right? And there's no, other than like Lamar's breathing or labor breathing, there's no instruction of like, here's how you're going to get your diaphragm back to doing its job. And here's how you're going to calm down your nervous system. And here's how you're going to start to adjust the way that you've learned to breathe through this compensation of your physiology, right? That information is missing. And so we have these like things, right? Like back pain, desk job, posture, asthma that directly impact breathing. And then breathing directly impacts all these other systems. And we're not paying attention to that thing, right? In terms of like, how do we fix breathing in a way? Because most people think breath work is this experiential thing, right? Like I lay down and I breathe and I have this experience and then I'm done, right? I dust my hands and I go about my day and I've just gone back to dysfunctional breathing for the other 23 hours and 30 minutes of the day.
It's a lot of mindfulness. It's what I'm taking out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. A mindfulness and intentionality. Yeah.
And really just that kind of like, I sit and think about this quite often because it's very much my job, but like, why don't we pay as much attention to breath as we do to nutrition or to movement or to exercise, right? When it is literally the thing that you stop it and you die. You can last days without food, weeks without food to some people, right? Yet nutrition, like we all understand, is really important. You can last a couple of minutes without breathing, but we still fail to kind of give it the due attention, right? And, it's not taught in school. It's not taught in,
Right.
medicine, like doctors aren't talking about this. And so I think people just have this idea that it's like, oh, well, I'm breathing, what do I need to know?
Yeah.
And it's a pity, really, right? It's a missed opportunity of like, wait, there's so much more that you can do with your own breath that supports how you feel and how you navigate the world. And it's free. It requires no equipment. It's nearly instantaneous, right? It's not something you do today to get a benefit from tomorrow, right? It kicks in about a minute, and there's a very low barrier of entry. Like we don't have to have these really complex instruction. It's like breathe slowly, breathe quickly. Like here's what happens in your nervous system, right? What happens when you hold your breath? What happens when you start breathing? Like once people understand that, you don't have to have like this array of different practices that you use. It's more like in the moment, oh, I'm stressed. Here's what I can do, right? Oh, someone cut me off in traffic and I'm like, well, elevated. Here's how I can bring myself back down. Those little in the moment course corrections, I think, are far more important than doing 30 minutes of breath work at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, is if there's any like tricks to becoming more mindful about this. Like I'm thinking I'm gonna have to set an alarm on my phone or something, like...
That's not a bad idea, right? But, what I think is a good thing when we want to develop more breath awareness is to try and use the environment in our favor, right? So instead of just setting myself this intention, like I'm going to be more aware of my breathing today, good luck, that's quite a hard thing to do. But how many times do you check your phone in a day, right? Most people, the statistics show us, is somewhere between 60 and 100 times a day. What if you set up this little like association in your brain that every time I check my phone, I'm also going to check my breathing, right? You don't need to find any more time. You're already going to check your phone. We know that. So every time you pick up your phone, you check in. Like, am I breathing through my nose or my mouth, right? If my mouth's open, I close it. Am I breathing up into my chest or down into my belly? Right? If I'm breathing up here, I'll just practice breathing down low. And am I breathing fast or am I breathing slow? And it doesn't really matter, right? You can slow down. So I just take one slow breath low into my body with my nose. And then I forget about it, right? Until the next time I pick up my phone. And it's like, oh, check my phone, check my breath. And in that way, maybe 50 to 100 times a day, you're course correcting. It's like you're teaching yourself what optimal breathing looks like. And the magic of this is you're kind of carving out this little neurological groove. You do it enough times, it becomes automatic. And so soon enough, you go to check your breath and you're like, nose, yeah, it's low in my body and it's slow. Great. I don't need to do anything, right? I'm doing it right.
Nose, slow.
Nose, low, slow, right? We like a little rhyming kind of thing that helps us remember, right? Through my nose, low in my body, and slow. And
I love it.
That's really the basis of like good, healthy breathing.
Yeah. I know so many people listening are going to be like me and want to learn more about this, become more mindful about this. How can we connect with you and your resources?
So the best way, I'm definitely most active on Instagram, and I try and share as much kind of like practical advice on there as I can. For those that are wanting to kind of perhaps dive a little bit deeper into breathwork itself, I have a 5-week self-paced course that's kind of like, let's introduce you to your breath. Here's your diaphragm, here's the mechanics of breathing, your physiology, your nervous system. And I'll leave a code with you, Militia, of a 20% discount. So if anyone wants to kind of like jump into that course and just kind of like start to introduce themselves to their breath. And then the final option is anyone that does work with others, in health, as a teacher, as a coach in fitness. We do run a kind of practitioner training as well of like, how can we take the science of breathing and apply that? In my kind of like selfish goal is just impact more people, right? Get this information out there that isn't really out there at the moment. And it can be so dramatic in terms of what it does for things like stress and anxiety and pain and energy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is a huge missing piece and I love what you're doing. And I'm super appreciative of your time here with us, but also just what you're doing in the world and how you're serving people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Militia. I appreciate that. And thank you for taking the time to have me on as well.
Yeah. And all the information that he mentioned, all the contact info and links will be in the show notes for you guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode on the Daily Wellness Podcast. We hope that you found it helpful for your own wellness journey. And if so, we'd love for you to leave a review. Then come back and listen for review shoutouts on upcoming episodes. For more information, check out the show notes and connect with us on our website, dailywellnesscommunity.com.